Welcome to the last part of Chapter 14. In the first part, we discussed the business environment and the general environment, as well as technological advancements. In the second part, we discussed strategy formulation, SWOT analysis, and different types of strategies. In this last part, we'll discuss organizational structure, and then in Chapter 15, we'll touch on organizational culture. When we discuss organizational structure, what we're referring to is the way in which human resources are organized to accomplish the organization's mission. There is no specific structure that is superior or best. The structure has to fit the organizational mission and vision to enable the organization to accomplish its goals. The organizational structure might give us answers to questions such as who is responsible for what? Who reports to whom? How does information move up and down the chain of command and across the organization? When you think about the traditional organizational chart, which puts certain people at the top and other people lower in the organizational hierarchy or organizational pyramid, what you're envisioning is a visual organizational chart, which is a visual representation of the organization structure. We will talk about 4 different structural options. Of course, there are others, but in this chapter, we will just discuss 4. The functional structure, the product, division, or area structure, the matrix structure, and a hybrid structure. But before we do that, we need to distinguish between organic organizations and mechanistic organizations. While no organization is going to be purely organic or purely mechanistic in its structure, we use these 2 extreme models to understand the difference between the 2 types of organizations. Most organizations will fall somewhere in the middle with more mechanistic tendencies or more organic tendencies, and I will give you some examples. The ways in which we distinguish between organic and mechanistic organizations are based on these categories. Organic organizations, imagine a small startup with few employees and few policies and procedures where all organizational members are freely communicating with each other and share decision-making power. This is an example of an organic organization. In this type of organization, there's going to be low formalization. There will be no formal policies, procedures, norms, rules as to how things are done. Things are addressed as the need emerges. There will be low specialization. While every organizational member will be hired for his or her particular skills, many employees will be doing lots of different things. For example, the casino that I worked for in Las Vegas had 2,000 employees. I worked in HR, and the focus of my job was internal employee in-house communication. I wrote the employee newsletter, did the in-house bulletin boards, the in-house television, and that was a very narrow job. If I had been working in a smaller hotel, my job would have been much less specialized. Had I worked in an HR department in a small hotel, it is very likely that I would have a much broader job categorization, not so narrow, not so specialized, and I would be doing interviewing and employee screening and background checks and employee hiring paperwork and counseling and training and lots of other functions that happen in a regular HR department. So that would be an example. A small hotel would have low specialization in which individual employees would do lots of different things. Low standardization is also characteristic of organic organizations where there are few standards or formal procedures to doing things, and employees do things as they emerge when needed in the way they see fit in the given situation. Organic organizations also tend to be very decentralized, meaning decision-making is not centralized at the top, but rather shared among organizational members. This means that the span of control is relatively narrow. It is not a situation in which one manager is responsible for many employees, but rather a more equal egalitarian situation in which span of control, the people reporting to you, that's your span of control, is relatively narrow. Organizations that are organic will also have low departmentalization, meaning we will not divide the organization into distinct departments. If you think of the Walker College of Business, it has a relatively low organic structure or more mechanistic structure because we have high departmentalization. We have professors who are divided into unique departments, teaching courses within their department. It is quite rare that a faculty member from one department will teach courses in another department. It doesn't mean that it will never happen, but it was quite unlikely because we are departmentalized according to our areas of specialization. And so a mechanistic organization is more likely to have high level of departmentalization. Employees will be divided into departments based on their special skills, their specialization. And so mechanistic organizations will be highly specialized in terms of employees having unique specializations and not working across different job functions. These types of organizations tend to be more formal, have standardized rules, policies, and procedures for any transaction. Think about the DMV, for example. If you go to the DMV to get a driver's license, it doesn't matter what DMV office in your state you go to, it is very likely that the process will be exactly the same. It is highly formalized and highly standardized. Mechanistic organizations also tend to have high centralization of decision-making power, where decision-making power is held at the top. Think about the military. The military is a good example of a highly centralized organization where decision-making is made at the top. And this also means that there will be a broad span of control. The people at the top have many people reporting to them. They have a broad span of control. Governmental organizations or other bureaucracies tend to have a more mechanistic structure. A mechanistic structure works very well for organizations that operate in stable and relatively simple environments, right? The DMV can have a mechanistic structure because there is little that changes in the environment that mandates that the DMV adjust the way it does its business. And so it will give licenses, it will give driving tests, and so on, based on very firm characteristics or criteria that don't change. And so this type of structure serves such an organization quite well. An organization that operates in a rapidly changing and highly uncertain environment is likely to benefit from an organic organizational structure a lot more. An organic structure enables organizations to be more responsive, more flexible, and adjust to external changes a lot more effectively and rapidly. Of course, no organization will be purely mechanistic or purely organic. Most organizations will fall somewhere in the middle. And of course, each structure has its advantages, but also some disadvantages. Mechanistic organizations provide a lot of clarity. Employees understand exactly what they need to do. They have high role clarity, and there is no duplication of effort. Everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing. There's a lot of clarity, a lot of stability. Of course, these organizations tend to be more rigid and have a harder time responding to external changes. Organic organizations are a lot more agile and able to respond to fluctuations in the demands or external changes. Think about Southwest Airlines. Southwest Airlines operates with a much leaner staff and engages in a lot of cross-training. And so there is very low specialization in that organization, which enabled the airline to shift its human resources around as needed and operate with a leaner staff, and then pass those savings along to their customers and operate as a low-cost carrier. And indeed, Southwest Airlines was the only airline that didn't have to lay off any employees post 9/11 because they were operating in such a lean way. And so they used low specialization. They used a lot of cross-training to enable their employees to kind of be a jack of all trades and know how to do lots of different things and shift people around based on need. And so organic organizations have the ability to respond to changes a lot more rapidly, but they also have some shortcomings in that there is less clarity and less stability. Employees might suffer more role ambiguity if they don't know exactly what they're supposed to be doing, because there's less standardization, less formalization of procedures, and there might be duplication of effort, which is not an efficient process. When employees don't know exactly what they're supposed to be doing, they might duplicate effort already put forth by their peers, and that is not the most efficient way to operate. So each structure has its benefits and its disadvantages. Organizations need to select a structure that best suits their environment to enable them to meet their objectives and strategic goals. As promised, we're going to look at a few examples of organizational structures. This is what is referred to as the functional structure, where employees are organized according to functional areas, right? Production, engineering, marketing, sales, accounting. You might see a human resources department. You might see a legal department. So these are organizational structures in which employees are grouped by functional specialization. This is a pretty common structure that is very often used in small and medium-sized organizations. It enables organizations to operate at high efficiency, no duplication of effort, high role clarity, and so organizations can have high levels of control and high levels of efficiency. And it's mostly suitable for small and medium-sized organizations or organizations that operate in low uncertainty environments. The one challenge of this organizational structure is that it encourages different functional departments to do their own thing. There is not a lot of interaction across departments. And so departments end up forming almost their own narrow silos, and their focus becomes more on their own departmental goals or their own objectives, and they feel almost as if they are in competition with other departments for scarce resources in order to accomplish these goals. And so this departmentalization, while it enhances efficiency and control, also requires a lot of coordination and communication across departments to prevent these silos of surfacing, so that organizations have sufficient communication across departmental lines to make sure that everybody is aligned towards accomplishing organizational goals. Organizations that have multiple product lines or operate in different regions might use a different structure, which is referred to as the product structure or division or regional structure. In this organizational structure, people are again organized by functional area within the product line or region in which they operate. This is often used by large companies that have multiple products and operate in multiple regions. For example, Pepsi uses this organizational structure because they have, of course, multiple products, both their beverage line and their food line and other product lines. And so they use this structure. This organizational structure enables the organization to have a more decentralized leadership so that the organization can focus on customer satisfaction and flexibility within its region or within its product line. And so we will have the headquarters manager in charge of the entire organization, but when we will have vice presidents for each product line or for each region in the world. For example, Xerox in the 1980s had this structure. It was a regional structure. We had Xerox Americas, Xerox Asia Pacific, and Xerox Europe Middle East. Each company operating, or each division operating as a separate company with its own production, its own research and development, its own list of suppliers, its own distribution network, customer base, and so on. So almost like three distinct organizations, which is the key disadvantage of this organizational structure. While it enables the organization to be more responsive to customer needs and demands within unique markets or within unique product lines, it represents a challenge because the separate divisions don't necessarily interact. And indeed, when Xerox was facing competition from Canon and Ricoh, these two competitors emerged in the global market. They operated in a much leaner way. They were global companies that competed at a global level, and they were slowly eating into Xerox's market share. And in order to compete with those lean global competitors, Xerox had to change its organizational structure to become more competitive. And so the division or product or regional structure becomes less and less efficient as the organization grows. And this is what happened to Xerox. They recognized their need to become more globally integrated and operate at a global level if they wanted to survive the fierce competition that they were facing. And so this results in something that is called the hybrid structure. The hybrid structure pulls some functional areas out of the regional or product divisions and puts them at corporate level. And this is something that Xerox did. They globalized their research and development. They created teams that included designers from all different markets in which Xerox was operating to design a product that could be sold in all markets and benefit from limiting the number of suppliers, reducing the variation across regions, which allowed Xerox to become globally integrated, leaner, more efficient, and more competitive. And indeed, Xerox was able, after their 10-year restructuring process, to survive the competition and continue asserting itself in the copier market. And so the hybrid structure is one in which some of the functional areas like legal, public relations, research and development are pulled up into the headquarters level and serve all of the organization's divisions. And then the local divisions that are either product divisions or regional divisions focus on other issues such as marketing in their own respective markets, or human resources, or production, or delivery, aftermarket service, and so on. And so this is the hybrid structure. The hybrid structure allows multinationals and other large organizations to have more flexibility and be better able to deal with an uncertain environment, be more responsive to customer needs, because they integrate both some functional areas at headquarters level and then some areas that are market specific, region specific, or product specific. The last structure that we look at is the matrix structure. The matrix structure resulted from the desire of organizations to integrate both functional and product areas and respond to environments that are uncertain with changing customer demands in an efficient, flexible way. And so the matrix structure involves lots of cross-functional project teams, right? All of these blue hexagons represent cross-functional teams that enable the organization to bring together individuals from different functional areas into a unique team. And so this organizational structure enables structures to respond much better to external changes by collaborating across functional areas and product areas. Some of the challenges of this structure is that people working on different teams, for example, Team A, right here, these 4 hexagons, the individual working on these teams represent product A or region A, and then production, engineering, marketing and sales, accounting, and maybe other functions as well, need to work together. And we've already discussed how diversity can contribute to higher conflict. And so it is more possible that people working in cross-functional teams, diverse teams of people with different functional skills, will experience more conflict. And so if you want to successfully use this organizational structure, you have to invest quite heavily in training, team building, facilitating communication to make sure that the cross-functional teams are indeed functioning well. This organizational structure can be quite time consuming to establish because it takes time to establish reciprocity and trust within teams. Another problematic aspect of this structure is the violation of the unity of command principle. This principle argues that employees should only have one boss. But if you're working on project A, you have two bosses. You have the boss who is responsible for project A, and then you have your own functional area boss of whatever area in the organization you came from. And so this is another challenge that is represented by this structure. It is a structure that is not used very often, but can still be very beneficial to some organizations. For example, Boeing used a matrix structure in designing its newest airplane by bringing together a team of managers, engineers, designers, marketers, and other specialists to coordinate their activities. So an organization might choose two different structures, one for the entire organization and one for a specific project. Again, as I mentioned earlier, no structure is superior, no structure is best. The structure has to support the organization's strategy. If the organization needs to change to respond to a SWOT analysis, to respond to a threat, or take advantage of an opportunity, very often the organization also engages in restructuring to make sure that the structure supports the organizational objectives. So before we wrap up the discussion of Chapter 14, a few last points regarding how organizational leaders can manage in these uncertain environments. And so in the beginning of this chapter, we discussed environmental scanning. Environmental scanning typically will happen by leaders who sense the environment, determine what's relevant for the organization, and then enact this environment by careful analysis, conducting a SWOT analysis, or collecting data. We looked at, for example, Procter & Gamble and the extensive market research that they do. That's an example of environmental scanning. Of course, it's not just leaders who are involved in environmental scanning. Other employees who are boundary spanners, who span the boundary of the organization, like salespeople, for example, who are frequently in contact with potential customers or existing customers, can inform leadership on what customers want, what customers are satisfied with, what their frustrations are, and so on. And so information gathering happens through environmental scanning, which is very intentional, and by boundary spanners, not just organizational leaders. In order to respond to an uncertain environment, organizations also have to make sure that their structure is supportive of the strategy that they're trying to accomplish, right? And we discussed different structures and when the need might arise to change your structure. We will discuss culture when we look at Chapter 15. But sometimes organizations try to change their culture if they feel that the culture is no longer supportive of their strategic objectives. For example, the Ford Motor Company historically had a very rigid, hierarchical, formal structure with many World War II veterans who had a very conservative approach to management, would have pre-meetings to meetings to make sure that there were no surprises, for example. And Ford found that it was not flexible enough, not agile enough to be able to respond to external threats and competition. And so they wanted to change their organizational structure and culture. And we'll discuss this in Chapter 15. Culture can be very difficult to change. There's this joke that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so organizations might recognize and need to recognize that culture is hard to change, but many organizations do try to accomplish this task. Ford, for example, implemented casual Fridays to try to reduce the formality in the organization. They printed red, white, and blue wristbands with the words "the way forward," a play on words on the company name, for employees to take in this idea that saving Ford is a patriotic action and that the company was trying to motivate employees to engage in this cultural change. The last thing that organizations can do to cope with uncertain environments is to lobby. Some organizations might lobby legislators to change legislation to create a more favorable environment for the organization. Some organizations might join trade organizations to lobby together for more favorable legislation, right? We already discussed the strength of coalition building as an influence strategy. And so lobbying via a trade association is one way to form a coalition. Of course, organizations can also form strategic alliances with other companies. They can engage in mergers with competitors or suppliers. They can acquisitions of suppliers or competitors, or they can form alliances with their competitors. GM formed an alliance with Toyota. Toyota was motivated to enter into this joint venture with GM to gain a foothold and to have access to GM's distribution network within the US. And GM wanted to partner and form a joint venture with Toyota to learn from Toyota's just-in-time manufacturing approach. And so this is an example of a strategic alliance between two competitors. That is one way that organizations try to reduce the uncertainty in their environments. So this offers a nice wrapping up of this chapter, and we discuss the challenges of enacting the environment in the very beginning, and we wrap up by looking at some ways in which organizations can try to reduce the uncertainty in their environments.